You've seen this happen, right? A brilliant, scientifically proven idea comes along, and it just goes nowhere. We all kind of assume that if an idea is good and the data is solid, it should just take off. It seems logical, but the real story is so much more interesting than that. So let's get into it. For a long, long time, the standard thinking, thanks to a guy named Everett Rogers, was this really clean, linear model. You can think of it like tipping over a line of dominoes. It goes like this. First, people get knowledge about an idea. Then, the evidence persuades them. They make a decision to try it, they implement it, and finally, they get confirmation that it was a great choice. See? One domino just knocks over the next. Simple, clean, logical. But here's the big puzzle. If it's really that easy, why do the dominoes stop falling all the time? Especially in a field like healthcare, where you have these amazing, life-saving innovations backed by hard science that just never get adopted. The line breaks. Why does that happen? Okay, take a look at this. This chart, based on a major UK study, really lays the problem bare. On one hand, you have something like aspirin. The evidence is super strong. And yeah, its adoption is widespread. Makes sense. But then you get something like changing childbirth. The evidence is actually weaker, but it's also adopted everywhere. And check out the computer support system, strong evidence, but it never got past the pilot stage. It's so clear. There is no straight line from great science to great success. That domino model is just wrong. So let's start taking apart that domino theory. The very first crack appears in the first domino, knowledge. It turns out that domino isn't nearly as solid as we think. The reality is that evidence is pretty much always up for debate. And this quote from the study absolutely nails it. In the real world, there isn't one single shining fact that everyone agrees on. What you have instead are multiple, often competing bodies of evidence. It's less of a commandment delivered from a mountaintop and more of an ongoing, messy conversation. So we have this myth that science just hands us a neat, tidy answer. But the reality is this messy but totally necessary debate. The study found doctors, for example, arguing that a so-called gold standard treatment just wasn't right for their patients in their community. They weren't just passively accepting the facts, they were actively questioning and reinterpreting them to fit their world. And what people consider credible evidence, well, it can get surprisingly tribal. It's not just about the data. Doctors might put a ton of faith in big, randomized trials published in a top medical journal, but they're also weighing that against their own experience, their craft skills. Meanwhile, nurses might trust a completely different set of journals and experts. This means a fact for one group isn't necessarily a fact for another, and the whole idea of a single truth just fractures. So that's the first big reality check. Now for the second one, because it builds on this. The domino model fails because the people involved are not just passive objects waiting to be tipped over. They are active shapers of the innovation itself. This is a huge flaw in that old way of thinking. It treats people like they're just empty buckets, waiting for you to pour knowledge into them. But the research shows the total opposite. People are active collaborators. They're weighing, they're judging, and they're negotiating with the idea itself. And believe me, they're weighing a lot more than just the scientific paper. They're asking real-world questions. Things like, how bad will it be for my patient if we do nothing? What's this going to cost? Is the rest of my team on board with this? And maybe the biggest question of all, will my patient actually follow through? The science is just one ingredient in a very complicated soup. And all of this leads to this really powerful concept called reinvention. What it means is that people almost never adopt an idea exactly as it's written. They change it, they tweak it, they customize it to make it work in their world. So the innovation that actually gets used is often a very different version of the idea that started in a lab somewhere. And that brings us to the final and maybe the most critical piece of this whole puzzle. The environment, the place where an idea has to live or die, is not just a passive backdrop. When it comes to innovation, context is king. The study gives us a perfect example. Compare a big, complex hospital with all its layers and rigid departments to a small, local doctor's office, which is much more of a loose network. You can drop the exact same brilliant idea into both of those places and get wildly different results. The idea is the same, but the context changes everything. So context isn't just a location, it's a powerful set of forces. It's the structure of the organization, it's the budget, it's the history between departments, whether the surgeons and the nurses actually get along. It's even what the patients themselves expect. Any one of these things can either launch an idea into orbit or stop it dead in its tracks. So if the domino model is broken, what do we replace it with? Well, The research tells us we need to stop thinking about a simple, straight line and start picturing a complex, interlocking machine. So let's build this new machine, piece by piece. The first part is realizing that the evidence is never just one solid object. It's fluid, and it's always being debated. The second piece is seeing that people are not passive targets. They are active shapers who will bend and mold the idea to fit their needs. And the final, critical piece is understanding that the context isn't just a neutral stage. It's a powerful actor in this whole drama. And this all leads us to the core concept, interlocking interactions. Picture it like three massive gears. The first gear is the evidence, the second is the people, and the third is the context. For an innovation to actually move forward, all three of those gears have to connect and turn together. You can't just push on the evidence gear and expect anything to happen if the people and context gears are stuck. So what does this all mean for us? In the real world? It means that if you want to spread a good idea, you have to stop thinking like a domino pusher and start acting like a mechanic. You don't just push data at people anymore. You start a real conversation. You bring people in as partners to help shape the idea. And most importantly, before you do anything, you analyze the context, the money, the politics, the relationships, because that's the machine you're trying to get running. This model really changes everything about how we think about change. It's not just about having the best idea. It's about understanding the entire system. And that leaves us with a final question to think about. In your world, what interlocking gears are turning, and which ones are stuck?